Good morning. I'm Victor Ramos, the CEO of the St. Augustine and St. Johns County Board of Realtors and a member of the Chamber's Economic Development Council Executive Committee. On behalf of the Economic Development Council, I welcome you to today's panel discussion, the impact of COVID-19 on the real estate market in St. Johns County. I will moderate today's panel discussion and will field your questions to the panelists following the presentation. To facilitate the Q&A portion of today's discussion, we ask that you submit your questions using the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. This morning, we are pleased to have a panel of local real estate professionals join us to discuss the current and future impacts of COVID-19 on the real estate market in St. Johns County and the First Coast. We are honored to have Nate Day, the president of the Northeast Florida Builder Association and vice president of H. Smith, Inc., a Jacksonville-based land acquisition, entitlement, and development company focused on single-family homes in Northeast Florida. Nate is a graduate of Duke University with a Bachelor's of Science in Electrical Engineering and Biomedical Engineering. I'm also pleased to introduce Roberta, otherwise known as Berta Odom, a realtor with Remax 100 Realty, who has served residential buyers and sellers in St. Augustine since 2003. Berta is also the president of the St. Augustine and St. Johns County Board of Realtors. From 2016 to 2018, she represented all realtors in the 6th District as the federal political coordinator, working closely with the then Representative Ron DeSantis on federal issues affecting home ownership. Berta has been on the City of St. Augustine Beach Planning and Zoning for the last 7 years. This position has given her an in-depth perspective of the issues that the city works to improve. She also has the privilege of working with me as the AE CEO of the St. Johns County Board of Realtors. She is a St. Johns County Chamber of Commerce Director, as well as the past chair for the South Beach Business Council. She is a results-driven person with a progressive career in management, leadership, and customer service in the corporate and real estate industries. Now, it really gives me great pleasure to introduce Mike Davis, president of AD Davis Construction. A family-owned and operated company since 1954, AD Davis Construction specializes in custom construction for commercial, residential, renovation, and historic restoration. Mike is the 3rd generation to own the business. He is also the immediate past chair of the Economic Development Executive Committee. Finally, I would like to introduce Charles, otherwise known as Sonny Shanks, managing broker for Ruggieri and Shanks, LLC in St. Augustine. Sonny is a graduate of the Realtor Institute, a certified real estate brokerage manager designated by the Real Estate Business Institute, a military relocation professional, and a member of the Commercial Property Exchange of North Florida. Sonny is also a U.S. officer, retired. Sonny, we thank you for your service. Thank you, Nate, Berta, Mike, and Sonny for being here with us today to share your expertise and knowledge. The order of panelists today will be Nate Day, Berta Odom, Mike Davis, Sonny Shanks. We would like to have each of the panelists give us an overall summary of their view of the marketplace and the impact COVID-19 has on them. And we will start off with Nate. Nate, you're up.
Victor, appreciate that. Thank you so much. And thanks for everyone taking the time out. I want to do a real quick national summary, and then spend most of the time, the 5 or 7 minutes I have on sort of what the local market looks like. As part of the Home Builders Association, we have a state and national arm. Our head economist out of the National Association of Home Builders has been putting out a lot of pretty good information as far as statistics to date, and their view of what the national outlook looks like. And so there's a couple of those that we just had given to us. I wanted to share real quick with everyone before I jump into the local. And a lot of it I think people know, but it kind of helps set the stage a little bit. So Kathy, I don't know if you have that first slide. I'll run through these pretty quick. Did you have the whole deck here? Oh, whoops. Go. I thought I'd sent you just a 4, but it looks like I didn't. Go ahead a couple. There's one that's single family starts. I'm sorry about that, Kathy. And you know what? I'm realizing I can just go over this real quick in summary. I don't really need the slides. If you want to go back to the just the head one. Sorry about that. You know, when you compare where we are start wise, you know, on a national level, we were not anywhere near where we were the peak in the last downturn. I think most of the outlook over the next 2 months to 6 months is hard to determine, but for the most part, whatever slowdowns happening nationally, they expect us, you know, in the next 18 to 24 months to be able to get back to where we were, you know, February, March timeframe. It varies, but I think in general, any sort of recession or slowdown in the housing market from this, you know, seems to be muted, or not muted, but, you know, we should be able to get back from pretty quickly. The National Home Builders Association also helps with Wells Fargo to put together a consumer confidence index as it specifically relates to housing, and housing starts tend to follow that pretty closely. You know, they've seen in the last month that thing drop about 30 or 40%. And so the expectation is that sales would drop about that much too in the short term. And in the conversations I've had with a lot of local builders, you know, we are hearing and seeing that from them, and I'll get into that in a second. And then the two things nationally I would share that are sort of positive signs as we look forward. One is, you know, the interest rate, the 30-year fixed mortgage, as everyone knows, I mean, over the last 20 years has steadily been coming down, and the Fed has been very aggressive to keep it down. And so while there is a, you know, global pandemic going on, the market as it relates to home buyers is still a good market if you want to think about owning a home. And so, you know, that interest rate is going to help us recover and work against some of these headwinds that we're facing with the social distancing. And the other thing too, nationally and locally, that is interesting and extremely positive is by most estimates, before this pandemic hit, we were probably on a national level, you know, about 1 million homes short of what we need to be in order to take care of all of the housing demands that are out there. If you look at the number of homes built by decade, it's been fairly steady as a ratio of our population until the 2010s. A lot of that was because of the magnitude of the last recession that we took a long time to get out of. And if you look at just the number of homes we built and how far behind projections and demand that is, we're still sitting in a market that has got a supply problem. There is not enough homes out there for the demand. And so even though there are some short-term issues with the economy, there is still more demand than there is supply for. And so that will help us as we come out of this and we kind of look forward. So again, I apologize, those slides messed up, Kathy, but that's sort of the main national picture that the economists helped put out there. From a local level, we, the Builders Association, you know, we get the opportunity to talk with all of the builders and kind of hear what's going on with their, you know, what they're seeing in the market. I'll tell you that the vast majority of the builders that we've reached out to and had conversations with have said they've seen their sales drop anywhere from 20% to 40%. And when I say dropped, I mean, they've got their weekly and monthly business plan projections, and they've been missing those somewhere in that range. You know, the biggest issues is there's not, you know, the traffic has almost come to a complete stop. There's not a lot of people out there because of all the requirements, the staying at home orders, and the social distancing. It makes it really, really hard for people to get out there. On the flip side, you know, some of the feedback we hear from the builders is that the the people that are out there looking for homes are the very interested buyers. There's not a lot of sifting through, window shoppers or people just out, on the weekend to enjoy kind of looking at homes. The leads that come in are all strong leads. And the positive side too is that there's still sales going on. There's still closings happening every week on new homes. And so, there are some positive takeaways from that. Most of the builders, if not all the builders, have put a pause on any spec home building or purchasing of lots from spec homes. They've all, for the most part, paused any of their money that's been allocated towards development or, purchasing of large pieces of land. Most of that's just because of the slowdown that is happening. They want to push off their inventory as much as possible. Builders and developers like us are all renegotiating contracts, trying to add 3, 6, 9 months to help push stuff off a little bit. But just like everybody else, everyone's hitting the pause button as much as they can. There's still closings happening. Any pre-sales are starting still, but we're seeing a lot of that slow down. And some of the ways that the building industry is adapting, and I'm sure you'll hear this from some of the other panelists, is the amount of virtual tours that are happening has greatly increased. A lot of people that live in the north that are looking to move down here are calling in, are able to walk through homes virtually. They're doing all of it over the phone, and even sales are happening without any interaction whatsoever. And so there is some adaptation that's happening that clearly will linger past this. And then from a government standpoint, we hosted a panel of the building officials for the 4 counties in our area, and all of them said about the same thing. Their permits, in February and March, most of them had permits that were at or near record levels. The amount of activity that was happening prior to most of the shutdown was extremely high. And honestly, their permits have been pretty steady. So they haven't seen a great slowdown in the permit activity. So builders are still trying to stay teed up in order to meet what they expect to be a fairly good demand coming out of a lot of the restrictions once they're lifted. All of the building officials and building departments in our area have some sort of virtual inspections that they're starting to do. So while everyone's working from home, they've all ramped up, their ability to process permits remotely, review plans, and even do field inspections over Zoom or other types of platforms that allow inspectors to walk through a house without being there. And so, again, these are all things that once we do get back to some sort of normal, will be around and be beneficial long term. As ways to stay efficient from a government standpoint. And then we're starting to see in Duval County and St. Johns County some form of relief being given to the building and realty community in the way of either reduction in fees or waiving of fees. The biggest thing there is there's stimulus dollars coming from the federal level to the states and to the cities. And they're trying, instead of just handing out some of the money, to earmark some to help get builders and developers off the sideline. And the conversations I've had with a few builders and developers, it is working. They're interested in taking advantage of the reduction in fees to start now versus waiting to see what happens. And so we are seeing some positive responses from the government to help drive some of that. And then, taking some of those national projections down to our market, I think everyone knows we have an extremely desirable location here in Northeast Florida. There are a lot of people still moving to Jacksonville. Most of the reaction to this virus of getting out of densely populated areas or even moving to warmer climates is all going to be beneficial to us. Our political environment here has been one that's tried to get behind construction and home sales. They understand that it's a big part of our economy. It's a big part of what drives growth and makes Northeast Florida a good place to live. And so they've all done everything they possibly can to keep the residential industry and the construction industry going, which has been good. And then the cost of living. I mean, if you want to move to Florida, I think as far as services and cost of living, Northeast Florida is still really the sweet spot. And so there's a lot of things that as we come out of this, Northeast Florida is going to be primed to take advantage of. There definitely is a pause happening right now, and a slowdown. But I think overall, the outlook for the most part still is pretty positive. So that's kind of a quick overview, Victor. I don't know if you're doing questions now or afterwards, but I appreciate you guys letting me share just a little bit.
And yes, we're going to take questions at the end of the presentations. But I'd like to ask a couple of follow-up questions, Nate. One is, you touched on the shortage of inventory, and we definitely have had that for the last couple of years, or if not longer. And the National Association of Realtors has predicted that they also agree with the shortage. They also predict that the shortage will probably last into the next decade because of all of the difficulties of trying to overcome the inventory shortage. And do you agree with that assessment that National Association of Realtors that shortage will probably go into the next decade?
Yeah, so going into this year prior to the coronavirus, I think the projection was we would add another, let me say this correctly, add another 300,000, like lots of shortage. We were going to fall even further behind. Yes. Just going into this year before the coronavirus. And so, this slowdown is, we're not slowing down the number of people that are, growing in the country. So it's going to be amplified. I don't know what the numbers are, but I would completely agree with you. And most of that is more and more, we're getting to a climate where it's really hard to deliver lots in a development. Right. And so it takes a long time, and there's just not enough headwind to overcome that. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the vast majority of people would say that there's going to be shortage of supply for a long time. And it's going to affect pricing, and it's going to keep people in rentals.
Right. And the other thing that I'm seeing is that buyers in this current marketplace are beginning to exhibit thoughts that builders ought to be offering more incentives because of the crisis and the shortage and they just, some of the side agents I've talked with, the agents that work at the residential locations, they say that they're having people come in and expecting the builders to offer more incentives and to reduce the prices. And of course, that's not happening and probably won't be happening for a little bit anyway. Are you seeing any of that?
So initially, we weren't seeing a lot of that when we were talking to builders. They weren't getting a lot of pushback. When I say initially, like late March, more and more of that is happening. But I can tell you that at this point, everyone's taking their licks, and so there's not this sense that they need to hurry up and sell some stuff cheap to kind of keep it going. They're trying to preserve as much cash as possible, and so they're not in a place where they're wanting to start doing that. I mean, the costs are the cost.
Right.
It's not
right.
like they can do a whole lot, but you do get some people walking in. For the most part, though, I mean, the sales that are happening are sales that are at, what the value should be. We're not seeing builders start to agree to that. But you do have people walking in trying to get a deal because they think that builders might be in a tough spot.
Very good. Thank you, Nate. And I might add that I was surprised when I reviewed the booking office desk at the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office that your name didn't appear that often.
I'm glad you didn't share any of that. I appreciate it.
Right. Okay, next we'd like to have Berta. Berta, you're up.
Okay, thank you, Victor. I appreciate it. And Nate, that was a wonderful presentation. I mean, I got a lot out of it, and it parallels with residential sales somewhat too. I guess I want to start out with showing you on some slides, and it's going to be Florida statistics, and then some of the slides will be St. Johns and Duval County, but what we looked like before COVID-19. And hopefully this information is going to help us rebound. At least that's the positive thought that we're going to do. These slides come from Florida Realtors, Dr. Brad O'Connell, who is our Florida Realtor chief economist. So it's not me making these numbers up. This comes from legit. So the first slide we've got up here is closed sales of existing homes, and it's from January through March of this year, 2020. It is the sales, these are the number of homes year to date, 65,000. And the good thing, I think, is the percentage change from 2019 to 2020. So you can see we're up 10.2% on single family, and condos 9.3%, which is extremely positive. We were really on a good start in 2020. The next slide shows more specifically, well, let's see, we can't really see Duval County, but that's okay. The 19% in the upper right-hand corner is St. Johns County. That is what the closed sales from this first year. So we are up 19% just in our county. And you can look across the state. And I believe I've got it on my chart. Duval County was 7% above last year. So we are really tracking, St. Johns County is really tracking higher than most in the state, which is a positive thing, except maybe down south. The next slide shows the dollar amount, which is always exciting. Together, year to date, with condos and single families, we are $32.1 billion of sales in 3 months, which is very aggressive for us this year in 2020. So it's up, just in single family is 19%. So it's we were really on a great track, and I'm hoping that this will be, will help us continue. The next slide does just a median sales price, and again, this is the state. But St. Johns County tracks pretty much of that $275 for single families, the median sales price. But again, we are up. We're steadily going up from 19, which, I hate to keep saying it, but, we've got to find something positive in all this. And I think this is really something to be glad about. The next slide does what we have as far as, let's see, yes, the active inventory. This is what we have on the books right now. So 83,000 homes in single family, and this is across the state now, not just in Northeast Florida. So what we still have sitting here is, of course, a negative from 19. So, but still, there is inventory. It's not as much as we need. As Nate mentioned, the supply is still very low. The next one shows by county. The next slide is by county. So you can see we still are up 7%, and Duval is, you can't really see it, but that's a 0 there. And I think the county above it is 14%. So, St. Johns County still has 7% above what we were last year in supply. So the next slide goes into a little bit of outlook that we have from the state. So the demand portion and the demand and supply in both slides you're going to see are the same. The housing demand is, of course, temporarily suppressed because of the obvious, which are the next 4 bullet points, which we all know, we're all experiencing ourselves. And the next slide is just the same thing, but it's the supply, which I have underlined, but again, for the exact same reasons. So the next slide is just it kind of just explains it, which Nate touched on it, but it's a supply and demand. So just by itself, if demand falls, the sales, of course, because there's not going to be the people there to want the sales, but that will drive prices down because the ones that are selling are going to say, I got to get rid of it. And so they're going to reduce their prices. Now, by itself, with falling supply, the number of sales, again, are reduced, but it is a seller's market at that particular time. And so the pressure will be for prices to go up, which, we all like, but, we like a balance of supply and demand. So the next, still in the short run, of course, there's a sharp drop in the pending sales. And of course, this slide was done before we had the phase 1 from Governor DeSantis come out day before yesterday. So will last at least into May, but I can still see it happening through May. But, at least from Florida Realtors, we are hoping and predicting wise, all the numbers are predicting that we're only going to lag by a month or two, which is, I think, again, a very positive outlook of things. So, and then the next one is what we have pending. The next slide is what we have pending. So pending all the way through March, and these will be closing in May and June. Just depends on, some of them may have already closed, but those were the numbers. We're down from 19, but not by much, only 1% in single families. So, and then the next slide shows you how we are. Duval County was down 10%. St. Johns County was down 3%. So we're a little higher than the state average. Then the next, is kind of, these slides are kind of obvious, but it's how it's gonna impact us, and it depends on a lot of things. The supply and demand, and the bottom one, the one way that demand may fall faster than supply, more buyers immediately exit, because the money is not there, and then there'll be sellers who just want to stay, move their property, and now might, and I apologize for the slide being cut off, but might stay is what that word is, and sell at a lower price. So it's just, when we come out of this, where are we gonna be? We would like a better balance, but it is what it is. So here, the next one, the new listings that we've had from January to March, still lower than 19, but still not bad. 94,000 units in single families, and condos 43,000. So still not a bad place to be. It really isn't. And then the next slide shows by county the new listings. So you can see St. Johns County is, by new listings, down 5%, but again, Duval is up by 9%. So Northeast Florida we're better than the state average, I think, and we're very, very fortunate. So the next and final slide is, can we pull out of the V-shaped recovery? We were high, we went down, and then we want to go back up. So again, obvious, recovery largely hinges on those next 3 bullet points. You've got to keep the banks, the monetary value up. We have to keep individuals working. And then, of course, as always, we want to stop the spread of the virus. So those are big ifs. I think they're possible, but they are really big ifs. I think that the residential, and I'm sure that Sonny will probably on the commercial side, but we agree, with Nate, everything that he said, and he gave a lot of the government side. And so, I think that we're not in a bad place. It may seem doom and gloom, but I do think the government is helping us out on different things. And I know Florida Realtors has been very active, along with National Association of Realtors, very active with keeping our realtors informed, giving them incentives. They're helping us get better education so we know how to deal with things in the future. So I'm always a glass half full, whether it be water, beer, or wine, but I'm always half full. So it's not a bad place to be. I think we're going to recover slowly, but I think we have the possibility of recovering. So Victor, I think that is all I have, and I appreciate it.
Well, Berta, thank you for that. And we do have it on record that you mentioned wine and beer. But we thank you for that. To follow up on some of the points, one of the things is that COVID-19 has had an impact on residential housing, in that some people don't want to have open houses because they don't want people coming in and out because of COVID-19. Some people may want to take their houses off the market during this pandemic. And I know that the Board of Realtors that you're president of has, and in the MLS that Sonny's president of, they removed open houses from the MLS system to try to discourage open houses during this lockdown period. And a lot of agents are scrambling, trying to do virtual live streaming of homes to take the place of the live open houses. Have you seen some of that impact in the marketplace, Berta, of the open houses and the virtual live streaming, and buyers or sellers wanting to take their house off the market during this period of time?
Yes, yes, I have. I have seen that just throughout our Realtor community that it's so much easier for vacant homes to be shown. They are, vacant homes are selling. If you look at what is going under contract and you look if they're occupied or not, they are vacant. But as far as the open houses go, I talked to a photographer yesterday who does all the virtual tours and everything, and he's saying that he is seeing more virtual tours and 3D virtual tours, that kind of thing, so that if a buyer is interested, the agent just sends them that. I know that there still are some agents that are going on Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and scrambling, for the lack of a better word, just to try to get some attention to their listings. And I'm very proud of our community. They're being very innovative and doing, but the people that are occupying their homes, the ones that are allowing buyers in, they're being very cautious with, they're either having the booties and the gloves and the masks. They're providing all that for people to come in and view their homes. So, people, again, are being very creative if they're serious about home buying and home selling. It's just, as we've all said, it's just a new world here, but we're adapting.
Yes, thank you for that. And I think a lot of people have said to COVID-19, one of the after effects of all this is that we're going to have a change in the way in which we do business. And that's not only in real estate, but across the broad spectrum. And virtual live streaming is one of those things that will probably be used even after the COVID-19 disappears, because if you have a virtual live streaming, that's when an agent goes through the house and is filming the house and is able to take questions from people who log into that virtual live streaming. As they go through the house, the buyer can ask questions of the agent as they're showing it. And it's really a great way to display a house and saves everybody a lot of time and effort. So I think those kinds of things will impact it. The other thing, Berta, I'd like to address for a moment is affordable housing. We in St. Johns County have had an issue with affordable housing for the past several years, and it's a critical level of lack of affordable housing. When I talk about affordable housing, I mean housing for the nurses and the police officers and the firemen and the teachers. They can't afford to live in St. Johns County because of the prices of the homes. And so everybody's been trying to do what they can to come up with a remedy for the shortage. And this COVID-19 is going to impact even more. It's going to be more of a problem. The only bright spot, and you can probably address this as well, Berta, is that this year is the first year that the legislature in Florida has said that they're going to fund the Sadowski Fund completely, 100% for the reason in which it was instituted, and that is those dollars in the Sadowski Fund are supposed to go to help with the affordable housing issues and crisis in Florida. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I agree completely with you, Victor, on that. And, I was very excited when the legislation decided to do that. Now, that's what they say now, and I'm not trying to be negative about it, but, if they get a shortage someplace else, it is a trust, and they can take money from it. But I believe that one of our brokers in St. Johns County, Mr. Dirk Schroeder, he did an evaluation of what our county, St. Johns County, sends to the state for the documentary stamps, which goes into the Sadowski Act. I think St. Johns County in 2019 did $5 million we sent over there. That's a lot of money from our county. Our county has, about 275,000 residents. So, that's a good chunk. I mean, it's out of our county compared to the other counties. I think that's a big chunk of money. I sincerely hope that the Sadowski Act is completely funded by the end of this year. What alarms me is all the apartments going up, and even those apartments, people can't live there. They're not, quote, affordable. So we need that building, and Nate, you know that better than I. We need the building that people can afford. Even in areas that used to be what we would consider affordable housing, the prices are, higher than they should be. So yes, I'm all for it. We need to house our police, our nurses, our teachers, everybody that makes our county run. So again,
Well, thank you. Thank you for that, Berta. And I know that the county commissioners have started the discussion of solutions that they can provide to help with the affordable housing situation. I was also encouraged, and Mike Davis can probably talk about this as well, but I was encouraged to see that the St. Johns County, I believe, have reduced their fees, that you have to pay when you go to build a residential home. And so that's going to help, especially during this COVID-19 crisis. And Mike, am I correct that I see that St. Johns County has reduced some of their fees across the spectrum?
Yeah, Victor, on Tuesday, they approved a resolution that starts May 1st today and expires August 4th that reduces permit fees and development fees by 30%. So it's a nice push towards that, because it is going to take us a little while to kind of get things, fired back up again. I will say that in my 30 plus years in this industry, this is the first time that the construction industry wasn't an initial casualty of a downturn. They deemed us essential, so we were able to keep working, both on commercial and residential projects, which usually, you go back to 2008, once you work through your backlog, that was it. There was nothing else in the future for you for a couple of years. So it's been nice to see that. There has been some slowdowns and some bright spots in the commercial industry. If you were involved in hospital projects or you were doing anything inside a hospital, that was all shut down, obviously, because of the COVID-19. But the governor did a really good job in the state, and they've accelerated road projects. So they've done some really good some road projects around here. They resurfaced US 1 just north of the city, which is one of the busiest places in St. Augustine. They did it at the best possible time. So I kind of, hats off to them for thinking outside the box and getting that done. I've talked to some commercial contractors, some slower payment from clients because of uncertainty in the financial markets, but those seem to be kind of clearing up a little bit. And one of our bigger builds, there's several hotels that are being built right now in St. Augustine, St. Johns County, and you're going to see that market slow down. Normally they're at a 70% occupancy in hotels this time of year. They're at 10% right now, so they've taken a major hit. And the same is true for restaurants, bars, and the attractions here in St. Augustine. They've all taken they've really the worst possible 6 weeks of the year you could cancel for tourism. So that's going to play an impact on our commercial market in the year to come, probably for a little bit longer than that. I got to give credit to the building departments. They've managed to stay open. We've had limited access to them. Nate was right. Some of the inspectors are doing Skype and FaceTime to do inspections, which is great way to think outside the box and keep things moving. So hats off to them for thinking of that. I do see a positive in that architects and engineers are very busy right now. They're still working on future projects, which means that there will be things in the pipeline once this ends. So that's a very positive for us in the long term. I do see a problem for us, and that's a supply chain issue, probably within the next 2 to 3 months. So there are products that are made in China, shipped to Mexico, assembled in Mexico, and then shipped to the United States. So China was shut down for a while. Mexico's been shut down for a month. And eventually we're going to run into supply chain problems. What those will be, I don't know. I mean, it'll all just depend on what areas pick up fastest and what inventories run out. But I can see us trying to finish commercial projects and not being able to get lights or fixtures. Talk to some of the hotel people. They're very concerned about some of the hotels under construction now. A lot of their furniture comes out of China. And are they going to be able to get all the furniture, even though the hotel's done? Can they get the furniture to open the hotel? So that's kind of the thing. I do see positives for St. Johns County. I read an article 3 weeks ago that you're going to see an acceleration of people moving out of big cities because of this virus, and they're going to be looking for medium-sized towns to move to. I also think they're going to look at areas where COVID was not very harsh on the community. St. Johns County did really well. So I think you'll see people relocating, an influx of northerners or big city people trying to find some place that they think is safer to live. So I think that's a positive for residential. And I also think we're going to see an increase in home renovation projects. We've trapped people in their houses for 6 weeks, and some of them have decided they don't like what they're living in. And so I expect that to be a market that'll kind of uptick a little bit the rest of this year and into next year.
That regards, I saw an article the other day, all the hype in the past year or two has been about the small houses, the 900 square foot or 600 square foot houses. And they did a study of those, and they said that all of a sudden now those people living in those 600-foot square houses are finding that they're way too small. It's way too small when they have to stay home. So that could be a problem. I saw an article the other day, Mike. One of the big box builders bought one of the suppliers, major suppliers to their construction business, so that they could have better control over their supplies. And I can see where that could help. But then again, you've touched on the supply problem of the products being built, originating in China and being put together in Mexico. And with the shutdown, it is going to be a strain on the residential and the commercial. So what are your thoughts about that builder that bought that supply company to have better control?
I think that's a good idea. I touched on what I was talking about was LED lights, because we've got a project where we got to order a bunch of lights for a tenant build out, and right now they're in stock, but when they run out, I don't know when they'll restock. So we're trying to get all those on site so we have them so we can finish the project. But on a residential side, there's been reports that you're going to have some shortages in some door parts and some door hardware. So if you're a residential builder and you're trying to finish your units out, you may have a hard time getting doors. So a lot of this is the fact that we've spread the supply chain out over multiple countries, and some of those countries have been hurt. And I think it's gonna impact us. I don't think it'll be a long-term impact, but it's gonna slow down us getting out of this downturn.
Well, thank you for that, Mike. I was glad to see that you were going to be part of the panel this morning, because I consider you to be Mr. St. Johns County. You have your finger in the pie, so to speak, as to the pulse of the county. You have a lot of interaction with the county and city officials and across the state as well. So, I think one of the things that you touched on is the building department in St. Johns County. And I think we've been blessed to have an individual, Howard White, who's the head of that building department. He's very innovative. He's learned over the past 5 or 6 years how to do more with less. And he's proven to be a person willing to work with builders and the citizens of St. Johns County to help them accomplish what they want to. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that the county, the city, the beach, all of them have done a phenomenal job. I think the police departments have been amazing in trying to deal with keeping people off the beach. I think they've done a great job. But Howard White, I mean, you think about what the county did. They just finished the automated system. So when you walked in, you hit a couple buttons and they guided you which desk to go to. They just finished all that. It had been up for maybe 2 months. They had to shut all that down, build up a temporary wall in the front, take plans in. And we were trying to help out. We had an architect from South Florida 3 or 4 weeks ago was going to send us a set of plans. I said, no, just email them to me. I don't need a set of plans out of South Florida where there's more COVID-19 cases than there are here. We'll print them and we'll walk them into the building department. And the building department is great. They said, we'll take them that way. So I think everybody's been working in a kind of a strange new world, and they've done a good job at it.
Well, thank you. So from the standpoint of COVID-19, what direct impacts have you seen in your business?
Well, Victor, what we've done, we segregated our employees. So if they were on a crew, they stayed on a crew. And then we've slowed down some of our projects where we might have stacked several trades in at the same time on a job. We're now waiting for one trade to finish before we put another trade in that job site. So we're trying to spread people out. So I've called owners and said, we're not going to finish on time because we're spreading people out and we're lengthening the project to keep people safe. Every owner has said that's fine.
Good. All right. Well, very well. Thank you for all of that. Do you have anything to wrap that up with, or have we exhausted some of the knowledge that you have?
Well, you've exhausted most of the knowledge that I have, Victor, but no, I think that I really think St. Johns County is kind of uniquely positioned because, and I give credit to the residential growth, but ours is a county that's going to continue to see people that want to move to it for all the amenities. And, commercial growth is going to follow that, but I think we're in a good positive place. If we were in a big city right now having this discussion, I would have a much darker outlook on where we were going to go.
One last question to you. I know that you have a radio program that you do every evening, and it's a sports talk show, I believe.
No, it's a news talk. We don't do much sports because our listeners tell us we're not good at sports. We're better at politics than sports.
Well, that's what I was going to say, but no. Have you noticed a lack of topics for your show because of the COVID-19? I know this isn't real estate related, but I'm just curious about it. Have you had a lack of material because of COVID-19?
No, initially all the interest was we were just pushing out information. Here's what's going on, and here's the decisions that are being made and why the decision. So it's really just became more or less an entertainment show and more of an informational show. We're sliding back into that entertainment stuff, and there's been plenty to talk about because there's still plenty of things going around the country, and every once in a while a Florida man story pops up, and there's always lots to talk about Florida man.
So what station is that you broadcast on?
We're on WFOY, so 102.1 FM and 1240 AM, and you can catch us on Facebook every night from 5 to 6, Uncommon Ground with Mike and Troy.
Well, I know I've listened to it just a couple of times. It's a great show. I'm still disappointed I haven't been asked to be on that, but that's another story for another day. So thank you, Mike, and
thank you.
Let's go. Sonny, you're up.
Well, thank you very much, Victor, and thank you, Mike and Nate and Berta, for doing all my lead-in for me. I really appreciate that. I'm going to discuss and talk a little bit about the commercial real estate and the impact that the current pandemic has had on that, and then maybe some glimpses of what might happen once we come out of this crisis. One thing that is sort of a rule of thumb in commercial real estate is that commercial follows the rooftops, and that is probably no more illustrated than any other place than St. Johns County, where you can certainly see that, especially in the retail segment of commercial. But I'm going to start out with hospitality. I'm going to talk a little bit about retail. I'm going to talk a little about office, multifamily, and then end up with industrial. So, and I picked hospitality and retail first because those are the two segments of commercial real estate that are just going to be hammered, are being hammered right now by the pandemic. Mike touched on it a little bit about the new hotels that are being built in the St. Augustine area and out in the new shopping areas to the north part of the county. And at 10% occupancy right now, when they should be in the 70s or a little higher even this time of the year, that's going to have a long-lasting impact. The restaurants being closed down and going to be opened back up on Monday, but at 25% occupancy inside, and they're going to have outdoor seating, and the spacing required for that limits the number of folks. Most restaurants operate at very slim profit margins, somewhere around 5, 6, 7% at the most. And they can't last long when they're only have 25% of their business. And if we go to phase 2 and they go to 50%, they're still going to have a very negative impact. So the hospitality industry is probably going to be the slowest to recover. Because we're tourist-based in the St. Augustine area. And so if we don't have the tourism and the quantity, and we were on a real tear there for a couple of years, everything was going up And then now we're going to be somewhat diminished because of the lack of tourists. But we might get a pleasant surprise. It might be some pent-up demand, and when we open back up a little bit more, we might get our friends from Georgia and South Carolina and Tennessee coming back and visiting during the summer. But the expectation is that they probably won't be in the quantities that we've had before. So I think the hospitality part of the commercial real estate is going to take a while to recover. The restaurants are those that probably hit the hardest. And on a commercial real estate news feed earlier in the week, there was a gentleman from the National Association of Restaurants who said that there's a possibility that 30% of the small non-franchise, mostly mom and pop restaurants will not survive. To me, that's rather a scary prediction, but you can certainly see what's happening locally, and we'll just have to take that as whatever we can get once we open back up. Retail again is taking a hit, and we're in a situation where we're building another large shopping mall in the northern part of the county, similar in size to the original St. John's Center in Duval County. And some of that's going to be slowed down. Some of the build out will be slowed down. So, that's certainly an impact. But we are also seeing some startup of some of the smaller strip malls again, at least in the planning stages, to see the land being cleared. Whether or not that construction will go forward as planned, I don't think anybody can predict that. But those are some of the impacts that I see, and I think we're going to be slow to move out in the retail side. And the small businesses, the personal services, the gyms, of course, are still going to be closed down for a while. And the personal services side, a lot of these are mom and pop businesses, and they may struggle coming out of this as well. So one thing that I see that the remote working is going to have an impact on the office segment of commercial real estate. We were already experiencing a decline in I call the WeWork syndrome, where companies were renting spaces on a temporary basis, or individual startups were renting spaces, and that has already started to slip into decline. And also the impact on offices themselves with the move towards the concept of open offices, that now has been probably had a negative impact with this, because folks are working from home and they don't want to come back and work in groups. And with the open office space, we sometimes had 6 or 7, maybe 8 workstations sharing the same table. I think you're going to see that totally change. People want to go back to more individualized working space. And actually, there was a Harvard study that came out a year or so ago that said that all this open office space is probably going to go away, because there's a lot of pushback from folks that they don't want to sit around a table with 6 other people. They need some private space, some quiet space to work. So now that folks have been used to working remotely, you might see that have an impact on office construction and the size of office construction. I think the move will be to smaller footprint and probably a little more decentralization of the functions of some of these large corporations. And one thing that the working from home has done is the cutting down on the commuting, and people are getting used to that. And we were already seeing somewhat of a trend in smaller office buildings built closer to the residential. And so when folks spend an hour and a half on Interstate 95 trying to get to downtown Jacksonville, when they could have an office a little closer to home in St. Johns County, where maybe it takes them 15 minutes to get to the office, I think you're going to see that trend as well. And I think that will probably help. In the multifamily arena, we've had some fairly large developments in the St. Augustine area and in St. Johns County in the last year. And I think that we'll probably see that continue. We had a little discussion on affordable workplace housing, and I think we're going to continue to have a problem in St. Johns County with the affordability. And that's primarily driven by the investors in multifamily who you just can't build a nice apartment complex because of the cost of materials and the cost of labor and get a return on that investment if you're pricing it at a significantly below market rate. So that's going to continue to be a challenge. On the industrial side, I think there's a real potential for St. Johns County to add industrial, and for two reasons. Industrial tends to concentrate with the transportation infrastructure. That's why you see most of the industrial building in Duval County. Most folks want to be within an hour of the port and the railroad infrastructure and the highway infrastructure. But with the bypass coming around through Clay County and coming into the western part of St. Johns County off of Interstate 10, there's an opportunity for us to participate a little bit more with the industrial infrastructure. And Mike brought up a good point too about the manufacturing part of is going to be an important part of, I think, St. Johns County's future. As the country tries to bring some of the manufacturing back from China and Mexico, there's going to be parts of St. Johns County where if clean manufacturing, again, could locate and be closer to the residential and eliminate some of that commuting. And I think that would be an important item to look at for our future as we start looking at zoning and land use situations. And I think the county could take a hard look at that, and I'm sure the county economic development people are doing that. So I think we have a bright future, and industrial and multifamily will continue. I think the office situation is going to be a shakeup, and I think we're going to see downsizing, decentralization, and relocation away from the large office parks into smaller office situations. Again, I think our retail and hospitality are going to be the slowest to come out of this, and that's probably where you're going to see the greatest slowdown in commercial construction. So,
Okay,
Victor,
well,
that's my take on it.
I appreciate that take, Sonny. And what I would say is please submit your questions. Continue to submit your questions. We only have a couple of minutes left. We did have one question. Might the supply chain problem create opportunities for U.S. companies who manufacture doors, hardware, or other products to become predominant again, to bring back those products to us from China? Very quickly, Mike, do you see that happening?
Yeah, I see that across the entire supply chain. So I don't just think it'll be building materials. I think there's a lot of stuff that is being made in China that's not going to be made in China in 2 or 3 years. And I think we've got a lot of, if you go to pharmaceuticals, almost all of our pharmaceuticals are in China, and that all needs to be brought back to the United States, especially the critical, stuff that 100% of it's in China and we can't get it if we need it. That's just not smart as a country and a vital resource. So I think you're going to see a lot of that move back, Victor.
Okay, well, thank you, Mike. If you would, send your questions to the chamber and we will get the answers back to you. If you have an individual question, because we've run out of time, I would like to acknowledge the sponsor of today's panel discussion, one that I know very well, and that is the St. Augustine, St. Johns County Board of Realtors. I also encourage you to visit the Chamber's website at www.sjcchamber.com. Follow the Chamber on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram for information and resources relating to the COVID-19 crisis, recovery, and reopening. On behalf of the Chamber's Economic Development Council, I would like to thank our panelists, Nate Day, Berta Odom, Mike Davis, and Sonny Shanks, for sharing their expertise with us today. Today's discussion was recorded, and the recording will be available on the Chamber's website under Chamber Webinars for playback at a later date. Thank you to all Chamber members and guests for your attendance and participation in today's discussion. And please remember to send your questions in. we will get you the answers. Thank you very much. And with that, our discussion is ended. Thank you very much.